see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Good morning and welcome to Artefact Live, where we look at the art and science of storytelling. This is episode 31. We're going to be looking at the amazing storytelling technique of film documentary. My name's Scott MacArthur, and we've been doing this now for 9 months, and it's getting more and more fun getting into the deeper parts of storytelling. So I'm quite excited about today. But let's just check out some bits and pieces before we do start to get into it. If you're tuning in from my Facebook group, which is called the Empathy Engine, I'll just stick that on the screen for you. If you comment, to get your name to appear in the comments, you have to go to this little link here, which is in the Empathy Engine group. Click that, click, and it'll mean that your name will appear in the chat. It'd be great if you could do that, because it's a bit off-putting when we've just got Facebook user in the chat. So if you could do that, that would be great. Also, all the videos that I produce every week, every Tuesday, go onto my YouTube channel, which is at www.youtube.com/Scott MacArthur. Now, in there, you'll see I've got 3 main areas of activity at the moment. There's this, Artefact Live. I have my little short documentaries that I make, which are called The Edge of Next. And this week, I've started to produce what's called YouTube Shorts. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of that yet. It's not been widely publicized yet, but YouTube Shorts are I guess it's an attempt to mimic or compete maybe with the TikTok world. You can make a little video. It's got to be in the sort of telephone standard size, 16:9, not 16:9 portrait, and it's got to be less than a minute. I've produced about 25 of these in the last few days, and I'm just putting them out there to see what people think of them. So if you get a chance, pop over to my YouTube channel. If you like it, hit the little bell and subscribe, and you'll see all my videos as I produce them. Now, the weather's getting better again, so if you've been tuning in for a while, you'll know that I like walking while I'm talking. So I'll be back in the forest shortly. I was up there 2 days ago, and the weather was quite nice, and the mud levels were not that deep. So once I get to that deep, I'm in the forest, because there's nothing worse than trying to walk and talk with a tripod or some other, a microphone, and try to walk in it in the mud, because I know exactly what will happen. I'll end up on my backside. So we're nearly there, but I'll get back out soon, and I'll let you know when I'm going to do that. So let me just see who's in. If you've never been on the show before, please introduce yourself. Let us know where you're tuning in from. That would be terrific. And I hope you find today's show interesting. I've had a great time pulling it together. We're looking today at film documentary. Now, I'm going to take you through something of a journey today. Again, as I say nearly every single week, this is a massive subject. I am not an expert. I'm a fan of documentary, but I'm not an expert. So I'm going to give you some headlines about it. I'm going to give you the sort of the introduction to the world of film documentary, and why it's so important to those of us who are interested or obsessed by storytelling. And I think it's something that we can all learn from, whether it's from a personal perspective, telling your own stories, or indeed from a corporate perspective. So all of you are tuning in from LinkedIn, this is something that you can actually, you can enjoy learning about it, but then you can directly apply it. And I'll give you some examples as I go through today. Now, there are so many documentaries. It's definitely a growing thing. You've probably seen the latest one, which is hitting the news, called Seaspiracy. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to come back to it. I'm not going to talk about it today. But it's something that's definitely part of our consciousness. Now, it was before COVID, but I think COVID has drawn us into a lot of these storytelling techniques even more. Hence why we spend so much time on Netflix and other platforms. But the actual world of storytelling within the context of documentary is also growing. So what is a documentary? That's obviously where we've got to start. If you're here and you've got any ideas, stick it in the chat and I'll certainly have a look at it. But if you think documentary, I wasn't sure. It didn't, so sometimes when you hear a word, it jumps out immediately. You think, that means X, Y, whatever. You can work it out. Documentation kind of came to my head, and I started to look into this. This is a long time ago. I'll tell you the truth. I did a talk on storytelling using documentary probably about 5 or 6 years ago at a film festival, and some of the slides I've got today, I'm not got very many, I never use many slides these days, but some of the information I've got today came from that. So, but by way of moving into it, I'm going to go back about 5 steps. I'm going to show you a quote from a movie rather than a documentary that I've spoken about many. Let me just take that off the screen. That I've used many times. I'm going to put the whole quote up there for you. One of my favourite genres, as you know if you tune in regularly, is science fiction. And one of my favourite movies, also as you know if you tune in regularly, is the film by Christopher Nolan called Interstellar. And in that movie, there's a point where Dr. Mann, who happens to be the bad guy, talks about his experience of being human, his experience of living on this planet that he's in, that he doesn't particularly like or know, but nevertheless talks about it. And he says this, he says, "We can care deeply, selflessly about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight." That empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. Now, I think that piece from Nolan has got particular resonance for today, because what documentaries try to do, and have always tried to do. Now, the first documentary was probably this one. There is debate about it. It's called Nanook of the North, and it was produced by an American called Robert J. Flaherty. And that name Flaherty is important because I'll come back to him in a minute. But what documentaries try to do is look at reality. Not always, but most of the time they try and look at reality. And it won't surprise you, it was a Scotsman who came up with the word documentary, and that Scotsman's this chap here called John Grierson. The John Grierson was originally from near Stirling. He moved up north to near Peterhead and then went to Canada. But he was the guy who worked with Flaherty and rather reviewed Flaherty's film. Now I think it was called Moana, which was about the Samoan Islands in 1926. And at that point, he came up with the word documentary, which he got from the French documentaire, and he cued the word documentary. But his definition, I really quite like. Even to this day, I like it, even though the English is probably slightly out of date. He says, a documentary is where you get creative treatment of actuality. Now, obviously, the word actuality is not one that we talk about a lot, but I love the idea of creative treatment, because for me, the documentaries I enjoy, and the ones I'm going to share with you today, and I'm going to do about 3 or 4 of those, are definitely art forms. They are definitely creative art forms looking at the real world. Now, there are documentaries that are about nonsense. Quite often they're in support of nonsense. So it's not always about reality, real reality. It's about personal reality and perceptions of reality. But for me, I'm very much drawn to the more factual type of experiences or factual type of debates and dialogues that you can learn from. But before I go into these examples, I'd just like to give you some examples of what John Grierson was meaning and how it can be, I guess, codified. Now, you don't need to write this down or worry too much about this, but it's something that I think helps, because it certainly helped me understand which ones I liked and which ones I didn't, and how I could use them in the corporate world. Now, I've got a comment here. This is from Graham Rose. Hi, Graham. How are you doing? Best documenter, John Pilger. Need to give me an example of his work. I'm terrible with names, Graham. So I know the ones I know, but if you give me an example, I'd love to hear it. Thanks very much for that from YouTube. So I'd like to give you, there are lots and lots of definitions of documentary. But this is a sort of an attempt. Now, I've taken this from various books and from people on who are reporting on YouTube on what documentaries are, and I think this is reasonably helpful. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Just going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes on it. But nevertheless, I'd like it to be in the video, because if you go back and you're watching this on rewatch, I think it'll help you get to why I chose the documentaries that I'm going to focus on today. The first one, which is often called verite, which is cinema verite, is what I referred to earlier about truthful cinema. And that's where documentary makers are doing things as it unfolds in front of them. So there's a lot of this in military contexts, and everything just happens in front of you, and it's recording what is happening in front of you. Now, I'm not sure if reality television would qualify as that. I think it maybe did at the beginning, 20 years ago. I'm not sure it does now, because a lot of it's scripted, so it's not really verite. But nevertheless, I guess there was a link at that point. Then there's the idea of docudramas or reenactments, and this is where there isn't any film of the original. This is where you have to go back and make film to actually represent the original thing that happened. And you'll see this a lot in things like the story of Kennedy's assassination, like the American Civil War, like in Scottish terms, the Battle of Culloden. They are reenacted. Now, a lot of these are quite naff, and there's a lot of them, particularly on the likes of the History Channel, which I think are pretty disappointing. But there are some good ones, and I will give you some examples later on. Then there's the one that I've used most in the corporate environment, and that is the talking heads type of documentary. And this is basically interviews where you intersperse your documentaries with something that's called B-roll. Sorry, I should have explained what B-roll is. B-roll, if you'd asked me 18 months, well, not even that, 12 months ago what B-roll was, I couldn't have told you. But what B-roll is little snippets of film made by other filmmakers that you can, or by yourself, that you can drop into your film to represent something. So, for example, if I'm filming, if I get back to my forest and I start to talk about whatever I'm talking about the future of work, the edge of next, etc., I might take some film of the forest itself without me in it, without me saying anything, perhaps capturing the ambience of the forest. And I would use that to insert at the appropriate time in one of my little documentaries. That's called B-roll. So the A-roll is where you're talking to the camera in the talking head type of documentary. The B-roll is where you're helping the viewer understand the context by showing them what's around you. Good filmmakers, I don't put myself in that category, I'm very much an amateur, but good filmmakers are brilliant at it. They will, even sitting here, if they were filming this, they would have already done film of the lighting setup, the microphones and everything else that I'm using. So at the appropriate times when I'm editing this, I could bring this in and bring it to life for you, the viewer. So that's what B-roll is about. Sorry, I should have said something about that earlier. Next up, we have the expository, a film that's designed to retell a story about an event or an issue. And there's usually a narrator and there's usually lots of footage of the event in plain sight. And I will come back to that very much so in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Then there's the participatory one, the one where you're actually performing a part in that documentary. The filmmaker is involved in that, trying to tell the story. And my favourite documentary maker, Werner Herzog, is the master of this. And I'm going to come back to Werner and talk a little bit more about him in the next few minutes as well. Then there's the reflexive one, which is about, how did I make the documentary? It's like, I like to call this the sort of the behind the scenes type of documentary where if you're in my Facebook group, you'll see me talking about, I've got this keynote to do. I'm trying to decide what story to tell. And you'll see all all that I go through to get to that final story and how I design it, develop it, edit it, film it, document it, sell it, put out pre-work, post-work, how I do it. That's oftentimes really good for an instructive video or just to show that you're a bit more human than the polished, perfect sort of keynote that you give at the end. And I think that's quite important. And I think it's particularly important in the corporate environment. And again, if I remember, I'll come back to that with a particular example that I was involved in a few years ago. Then you get the two that I guess I use a little bit in my own efforts at making little documentaries, but that's the impressionistic ones where they're non-traditional, it's very stylistic, and then of course the experimental, the avant-garde cinema where there's no rules at all. You just do what you like. Now these are both techniques that I'm not an expert in. I guess I know more about film than documentary in this space, but nevertheless, I think it's something that we can take something from to use in our filmmaking for ourselves. Even when we're making videos like this, we can start to think about anything that we could apply to our own work. So that's the sort of and I'll put that back up again. So that's the sort of there's mockumentaries, which are comedic documentaries. There's also some other ones, but for me, these are the important ones for you, the viewer, to think about in the context of what I'm doing with you in trying to explain the art and science of storytelling. Now, the word art, and remember, I'll show it again, the word art is really important here because, as Grierson says, it's the creative treatment of actuality in many documentaries. Not all. Some of them, as I said earlier, are actually real life verite. They're looking at real life as it actually is. But the majority of them certainly the ones that appeal to me are creative. And I'm going to talk about a few of those. So I hope as an introduction that makes sense. If you've got any questions, please pop it into the captions and I'll do my best to come back and answer those questions. So I'm going to look at a number of examples. 3 mainly, and maybe a half at the end, because there's some great news I've got at the end today that I've got a guest coming on that I'm delighted about. So I'll tell you some news at the end of the show. But nevertheless, there's these 3 main documentaries, and I've tried to put them in a semi-structure. They all begin with C, purely by coincidence. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little clip from each one. Mainly, I'm going to use the trailers that they produced because the trailers are pretty good, and then I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to draw out some evidence that I think suggests that they are useful for the human living in 2021, and then we'll go on and we'll see what we can come up with in terms of lessons that we can learn from that we can perhaps use in the corporate environment. So the first one I'm going to look at is by a guy called Adam Curtis. Now, Adam Curtis is quite famous. He's quite well known. He works or he produces documentaries mainly for the BBC. They don't tend to show his documentaries, though, on the mainstream BBC. They tend to be on iPlayer or on YouTube. So this one is a new one, just came out a few months ago. It's called I Can't Get You Out of My Head. And I don't know if you can hear it. My dog is barking downstairs. I can't get that out of my head. So I'm going to go and sort that out while I'm playing the video. Have a look at this. This is a very short clip, so I'm going to run to let the dog upstairs, and then you can let me know if you've seen the film or not. I think this is a brilliant documentary, absolutely brilliant.
You sit in your room and you talk to the wall. You're feeling small, but still have a ball, and you can't explain what's anyway in vain. And you paint your face and dress in black and various shades, and still can't express the way you feel about a lousy feel. Until the morning, all by yourself, and somehow you know you're not alone. And you dance until the morning, all by yourself, and somehow you know you're not alone.
Dog rescued. Adam Curtis, he's not everyone's cup of tea. He makes... His editing technique is very choppy. Even in that clip, you can see he uses lots and lots of little films. You could say he cherry picks from history to explain something. But I'm really drawn to him because he tries very hard. As you can hear even in that clip, he tries very hard to mix the different storytelling forms. He uses music a lot. He likes to try and find music that represents or is of the time of the documentaries that he's making. He tries very hard to, in this current documentary, I'll show you what he says, actually. I've got it here. He tries to tell the story that of today in this particular documentary. He calls it, the story of how we got to the strange days we're now experiencing, and why both those in power and we find it difficult to move on. So he tries to make all his documentaries are like this. They are very thought provoking. They are sometimes. They go, in my opinion, too far. Sometimes they don't go far enough. But he's in a very, I don't say this often, but I think he's brave. I think he makes incredibly brave documentaries that tell incredibly powerful stories. Now, even the visual there in that clip that I showed you of the two girls dancing at the end, that when that was filmed back in the 50s was not allowed. That was against the law. That was a car crash in waiting for those people. Terrible, terrible times in terms of sexuality and race. And he tells how this history cannot be ignored. Now, I've said this before on the show. You can't ignore the past because you'll just repeat it. And I know lots of people have said that, and it's attributed to many people. But, and I think Curtis does it beautifully. So what can we learn from Curtis? Well, I like the fact that he uses this edit idea. Now, I've got a friend, Tom Borley, who's a musician and now he talks about high-performing teams and about energizing teams. And Tom said to me about 10 months ago, he said, look, when you're editing, Scott, because he's also been a film editor in his day, film producer, he said, look, the edit is really, really important. You've got to think about, how you edit your stories on film or in writing, whatever medium you're in, to try and get the major points across. And I came to the conclusion, the hard way, making over 200 hours of film in the last 9 months, that the edit is in many ways the story. And I think the way Curtis does it, he does it beautifully. He brings all these disparate parts together. It's a bit like, in my one of the episodes I did previously about science and storytelling, I introduced you to the word consilience. And that's about the likelihood of something being likely to be true is higher where there are multiple disciplines coming to the same conclusion. And I think that's what Curtis does. He doesn't say that. He doesn't talk about consilience. But I think what he's doing is he's looking across time to find story threads to create a new story world. And I think he does it brilliantly. So that's the first one. So if you've never seen that, I do highly recommend it. It's an investment because it's 6 episodes. It's on, I think it's on Netflix right now, and it's well worth investing in. And I watched it. Believe it or not, I watched it in one go because I just it was about 6 o'clock one night. I had the house to myself, apart from the dog. I switched out all the lights, got a bottle of wine, and I sat and watched the whole thing. And I took a lot of notes because it was powerful. It really was powerful. And one of my tags is, stories can change the world. Well, they can. And I think what Curtis is trying to do is to change the world. He's trying to show us that although today's a difficult time to be alive, it may be not that bad, and it could actually be an emergent time. And I think that's quite a powerful message. Now, the next one I want to do, now this is Werner Herzog. Now, what can I say about Werner Herzog? If you've never heard of Werner, sorry, I forgot. I should look at the chat. Let me have a look. Here we are. There's a few people here. Graham, thank you. Graham's just given me some background about. I know Dirty War, of course. Yes, thanks, Graham. Yes, yeah. I'm terrible with names. It is terrible. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I've got lots and lots of hackers coming in from Twitch. Hello, Twitch. Thanks for all the hacking. That's not what I'm going to engage in, but nevertheless, thanks for being here. So let me get back to the main theme. Werner Herzog. Now, I asked you if you wanted to play along, to watch Inferno, which is one of his great documentaries that's on Netflix at the moment. If you've watched that, you'll know where this is going to go. But I find Herzog... He quite often is able to invoke in me quite a significant emotional response. And I think, and I mean, again, I've said it before, I'm not an expert on this, but I think what Herzog does is he's in the documentaries for a start. So you get to know his rather famous behavioural types. He's a quite grumpy guy. He's very directive. I mean, he's made over 40 films, so he knows how to direct a film, but a feature film. But he's quite thoughtful, and he does a lot of it off the hoof. So again, I'm going to show you a clip from one of his movies. This happens to be my favourite one of his movies. It's called Cave of Forgotten Dreams, and I won't tell you anything. I'll just show you it because this is the 3D cinema thing. I don't like it. It's never appealed to me. It always makes me feel slightly sick, and I can never see anything because it's a lot dimmer, and my eyes are getting old, and I can't see things. But this film, if you ever get a chance to see it in a multiplex, in a big one of these 3D dome type environments, the Miramax type things, this is Cave of Forgotten Dreams by Werner Herzog.
And I will take one light as well. So it's 3:05. We have 1 hour.
Silence, please. Please don't move. It looks as if it had been done yesterday. To listen to the silence in the cave, and perhaps we can even hear our own heartbeats.
Now, if you've never seen that film, it doesn't matter if you're not interested in archaeology or even history. To watch it and to experience the world through Herzog and his team's eyes is quite something. Now, this is not a one-off. He doesn't just leech off other people's ideas and reflect back secondhand knowledge. He goes into this cave, one of the first people ever to go into this cave. And him and his team, and there's only a handful of them because only so many of them are allowed in, go around the cave. And they're the first people to see some parts of the cave. And I love the line where he says, there'll be a moment of silence, perhaps we can even hear our own hearts beat. And in the actual documentary, it's quite a long period of silence. Very brave again, very like Curtis before him, very brave. And I love there's two parts that you might have seen. There's a little clip there. There's a man playing a little flute. The flute was found near the cave, and they reckon it's the same age as the cave, and then people who lived in the cave. And the musician is brought in to make the music that was being played back in the day when that cave was actually painted in the first place. Really powerful. Really, really powerful. And there's so many lessons in Herzog's work. I mean, there's another film he did, which I love. It's called The Abyss. And remember, empathy only extends as far as your line of sight. Well, The Abyss is about people on death row, and they're not nice people, these people that they interview. I mean, there are innocent people on death row, I'm sure, but these people are not innocent people. These are tough criminals. And Herzog interviews them as they're facing the end of their own life. And wow, it really, it's a funny response that can be invoked, because I felt empathy for these people. The monsters, and I think he's able, because I would never meet someone like that. It's not part of my life. But I think having the filmmaker to tell that story of other people and to share how he feels about meeting these other people is extremely powerful. So I strongly recommend getting into Herzog. His movies are a bit more challenging sometimes, not to everybody's taste, but his documentaries, I think anyone who really wants to learn about storytelling and goes in with an open mind can get a lot from Herzog. Some people say he's quite pretentious. I don't agree with that. I genuinely think he means what he's saying, so I don't think he's pretending. I think he genuinely thinks that there are stories to be told in these odd and wonderful places. I'll end the Herzog part by just saying there's another one of his films which is about using mobile devices whilst you're driving. The name is just going right out of my head, but if you Google that or YouTube it, you'll find it. And it's freely available on YouTube. It's only 28 minutes long. I dare you to still use your phone if you ever do after having watched that particular documentary. It's brutal. And Herzog can make that type of brutal film. Really can. Really, really can. So that's the second one. Now the third one. Oh, talk about brutal. If you are slightly, upset by things like animal cruelty, I don't recommend this film to you. But my artifact this week came from this film. Those of you who are more observant will know I always wear these things on my wrist. And this particular one here, can I take it off? Yes, I can. I've not had it off for years, so it might break. This particular one here is called The Dolphin Project, and if you spin it around, his name's probably come off now. No, the name's still there. It's by, and there's a guy, that blue, you can't see it, it's not good enough resolution, is by a guy called Rick O'Barry. Now, I had never heard of Rick O'Barry until I saw this film, and honestly, I was brutalized by this film. I couldn't cope with it. It took me, I can even feel the emotions coming back now because it is such a terrible example of how bloody stupid people can be. Let me show you the clip first and then we'll have a chat about it.
But I do want to say that we try to do the story legally.
There it is. A little town with a really big secret.
It's so bizarre what's going on over here.
When we first got in the country, we had no idea who was following us.
You think they know we're here?
We didn't know if it was the whalers, the Japanese mafia.
Somebody's behind me. I don't know who that is.
They don't like me. They don't like my message.
Rick is world famous for his work with dolphins.
I feel somewhat responsible because it was the Flipper TV series that created this multi-billion-dollar industry.
The dolphin smile is nature's greatest deception. It creates the illusion they're always happy. You realize after a while they don't really belong in captivity.
I'd never seen so many dolphins before.
The Japanese people don't even know about it.
They take the boats around to the secret cove that nobody could see.
They're afraid of cameras. They said if the world finds out what goes on here, we'll be shut down.
They were hiding something.
We need to get in there and film exactly what happens. We need to know the truth.
We needed people with a special set of skills to implement this mission.
They're behind me.
Let's go.
Good luck.
Underwater camera is set.
They're not being told that the free lunch meat that their children are getting are contaminated.
Let it not be said that you didn't know about it. You know about it.
If we can't fix that, there's no hope.
Okay, there's a flashlight. Guards are moving.
Get out of there. Get out of there now.
Now, The Cove isn't for the faint-hearted, and the director, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, I think it's Hoyos, he was the fellow with the white hair and the blue shirt in the film. He does a brilliant job. Now, that trailer is deliberately made, I think, to encourage people to watch the film. The film is nothing like that. It makes it look like a almost like a spy novel. Now, there is an element of that. The film is about basically the Japanese trade in dolphin meat and also SeaWorld. I've got to watch what I say, I guess, but SeaWorld and how they acquire their dolphins. And it is utterly brutal. And the people who were doing this, were doing the fishing and capturing these poor animals, were violently against Rick and the team doing their job and coming in to see what was actually happening in this sort of really powerful example of, storytelling from a documentary film perspective. And the story of their covert operations is all very well, but I think the visuals, the sea running red with the blood of dead dolphins and the screams of the dolphins will live with me forever. Emotions, off they go. It is that type of documentary. I've never had that from a film, a fictional movie. I mean, even my favourite fictional movies, which do invoke emotion in me, have never had the impact that this has had on me. So, again, I would urge you to watch it, maybe with one eye. But it's as brutal as anything. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? They say, well, you care about animals, you don't care about humans. I don't agree with that either. I think the more you care about animals, the more you appreciate humans and care about them. So it's a beautiful, beautiful film. And Rick at one point says, if you aren't an activist, you're an inactivist. Now, isn't that poignant for what we've lived through in the last 12 months with all the issues around the pandemic, with Black Lives Matters, with the we movements and all the other things that are going on? I think Rick did hit the nail on the head quite a few years ago, so I recommend that documentary to you. So what about all of this? What can you do with it? Well, I mean, it's, I think for me, it's mainly about, learning, and learning is one of the most important things for any storyteller. You need to learn about how others are experiencing the world so you can explain that or understand that, much more important, and even more than that, have empathy for people who you're never likely to meet and whose experiences you're never likely to experience. And that's why I get frustrated when, documentaries tend to be from one perspective. I like where there are two or three released together. There was one example, which is not the best example, but it's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, when the Da Vinci Code came out, which from the awful writer Brown, who, but he knows how to tell a story and keep you occupied. He's a terrible writer, but he's brilliant at storytelling. That's another story. But there was a lot of documentaries come out after that about how much nonsense it was or about how true it was. And, there was lots, and you can literally spend hours having watched that movie or read that book, watched the movie. The movie's not great. It's even worse than the book. But no, you can really study it for a long, long time because I've made a lot of documentaries about it. I'd like to see more of that. I'd love to see a counter Adam Curtis film made by someone who's perhaps a bit more to the right. I would love to see the Japanese fishing industry's take on the dolphin killing and selling that they're involved in, a lot less now than they were when that film was made, thanks to Rick and the team. But I think there should be more balance. I think that's one thing I will say about some of these things. But it's not their job to always give balance. Their job is to tell a story. And I've used this. I mean, I said earlier, I'd give you a couple of examples. Well, there's one where I was working with one of the big insurance companies, actually a reinsurance. It's an insurance company called Phoenix, the Phoenix Group, based just outside Birmingham. And we were doing some work around what they used to call employee engagement. And I thought, well, we're doing all these interviews to try and I guess it was a survey of some sort. And I wanted to tell the story of the survey, but not just publish the usual results, where you have graphs and lots of numbers. So I got the idea from, I don't know if you've seen the Tears for Fears video with just their faces with the black backgrounds and they fade in and out as they're singing the song. I wonder if we could do that. So we did. Now, I can't show you because I can't find it. I'll come back to it and show you another week. But nevertheless, it was about 20 people telling the story of how they felt about working at the Phoenix Group. And it was really successful, really successful. Another example, which I was quite proud of, and I can't show you that because I don't even have it, but I was working with a company called TNT, the haulage company who do lots of the, moving parcels around the country, etc. And the chap who ran TNT at the time, I think he's moved on now, but he was quite creative, and he wanted us to come in and help him understand what a day in the life was like working at TNT. Now, it was before, show my age, these things. So what we did was, well, at least these things having any quality to them. So what we did was, we gave them all little handheld cameras, and off they went. And they had to tell their story a week in the life of a driver, a delivery man, delivery woman at TNT. It was fantastic because it really gave the management, the leadership, a perspective on what it was really like to work in that organisation. So these are basic techniques taken from the world of documentary filmmaking that you can use. So I think it's very powerful. I think there's lots and lots of lessons here for anyone who's working in the corporate environment or the personal development world. Documentaries can really help you understand things. So I hope you found that interesting. I'll just check to see if there's anybody else put any comments in the chat. Oh, I'm getting lots of spam, guys. Graham's saying, thanks. Scott does not appreciate the literary output of that. Yeah, I don't. I think he's terrible. Because what he does is, you go, and this is a pen. And in a film, you don't need to say, this is a pen, there's ink in it, it's got a black top, but he does. It's terrible. Anyway, not a fan. But I do appreciate him as a storyteller. So it just shows you that a bad writer can be a good storyteller. As I said earlier, I might have to come back to that and explain that a bit more, but it's so true. So anyway, thanks, Graham, for your comments from YouTube today. I will finish with something else, and it's another documentary. And it's one that has had phenomenal impact. And as you know, I always finish the show by encouraging you to go out and find your own stories. And one person who did that was a guy who wrote The Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore. We didn't write it. He worked with others to produce The Inconvenient Truth, which has a fundamental impact on how we regard pollution and climate change on the planet, right? And one of his lines in that I use myself quite often when I'm speaking was from Upton Sinclair, who was a journalist, and it says, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on his not understanding it." And I'll say that again. It is difficult to get a man to understand something if his salary depends upon his not understanding it. So what Gore did in that documentary was he linked climate change and pollution to the fact that, in order for us to actually address this, we're going to have to take on our own experiences of the world. We're going to have to change the way we work. It could cost us our livelihoods, but it's so important we've got to do it. Now, that documentary is good, and I recommend it. It won an Oscar, and rarely for a film that wins an Oscar, I agreed. And it's a terrific piece. But what's really interesting about it is Al Gore was never particularly famous for his speaking, his presentation technique, his ability to orate, to share messages. He was an okay politician. He probably won the election. But nevertheless, he wasn't famous for it. But one day he came across someone called Nancy Duarte. Now, Nancy, who runs the Duarte Company, I first came across her about 20 years ago when I was working at KPMG. And she wrote a book called Slideology about why, if you're going to be presenting, it shouldn't be the old-fashioned sort of PowerPoint bullet point type thing. You need to think about the narrative and the pictures and the messaging and all the rest of it. And I won't go into that in detail. She's also written some brilliant books, one called Data Story, about how to use data and to communicate data rather than just giving tons and tons and tons of graphs like the British government did during COVID. And she's also written the standard Harvard Business Review book about how to create a powerful presentation. And she her and her team coached Gore through producing a presentation that ultimately became The Inconvenient Truth. And the big news is that I asked Nancy if she would like to come on the show, and she said yes. So Nancy's going to be coming on the show. Not got the date yet. We're just working on the date just now. I only got notification this morning that she's going to come on. But Nancy's going to come on. Now this is terrific because I have spoken to Nancy in the past. It was a long time ago when I was in consulting, and she was very helpful. I don't know if she remembers me at all, but she's a very, very interesting person and an absolute. I think she's the best presenter, certainly coach of presenters on the planet. So I really hope that you will tune in for that, and I'll announce it in the next few days, I hope, once her team get back to me with a date. So watch out for Nancy Duarte. The other thing that's happened is also great news. I've been looking for some of my contacts, some of my people I've worked with or I've met or I've interviewed over the past few years that I think have something to say about story that's not always obvious, that can challenge us. Have you ever heard of Dunbar's number? Well, that's from a professor of psychology, evolutionary psychology, from Oxford, called Robin Dunbar. Now, I met Robin about 6 or 7 years ago when I interviewed him for something, and I've asked Robin to come on, and he's also said, "Yeah, I'll see what we can do. Let's try and make it work." So I'm hoping to have Robin on as well, which is fantastic because he's a fascinating guy. He is from the academic world, so there's things I'd like to talk to him about, that communication in the academic world. I've spoken a lot about how difficult it is for scientists to seem to come down to us mere humans level to communicate with. So I might talk to him about that. But that's coming up soon as well. So I'm looking forward to meeting Nancy properly on here and then reacquainting myself with Robin. So I hope you found this week useful. I've loved it, and it was terrific going back into some of these documentaries that I really love, because certainly Cave of Forgotten Dreams, I must have watched that 50 times. I mean, I really do like that, but I'll get back to that again, I'm sure. I might even watch it tonight again, because it's sort of, I'm quite intrigued by it again. It's one of those types of films that you can go back and watch many times. So I hope you found this week interesting. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to talk about next week. I've got about 5 ideas I'm working on, so I need to decide which one I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to, funny enough, I know the next 6 after that, but I don't know what the reason is. A guest dropped out for next week that's coming back in 2 months, so I've got to come up with something for next week. I've got an idea, but I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. But before I go, just to remind you, and I say this every single week, watch out for the stories in your life this week, because those stories could be the ones, a bit like Rick and the Cove, a bit like Adam Curtis and I Can't Get You Out of My Head, a bit like Herzog and the Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Those could be the stories that change the world. Thanks very much for tuning in. My name is Scott MacArthur, and thanks for listening and watching to Artefact Live, the art and science of storytelling. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.